So how is being an airline pilot and dealing with an emergency on the flight deck similar to owning real estate? Well, one of the things you got to understand is when you have an emergency on the flight deck, it can be life or death situation, right? If you have an engine catch on fire, you have to make sure that you know exactly not only what you're doing, but what everyone else in the flight deck is doing as well. Now, if you own a rental property and now the property is damaged and maybe it's becoming dangerous, like a roof collapsing or maybe a pipe bursting, you have to make sure, very similar, that everyone knows what they're doing. Now, it may not be as catastrophic in life or death as you would be at 40,000 feet with an engine on fire, but it's very similar. And I have learned that over the past 25 years of both owning real estate and being an international airline pilot, that there's a lot of similarities that investors can learn from airline pilots and how we handle and deal with emergencies. Now, one of the first things I've learned as an airline pilot, one of the first things they teach you is that no matter what the emergency is, it doesn't matter how catastrophic it is, the very first thing that we're taught to do is to sit back and take a breath. Just sit back, take a breath, and assess the situation to make sure you get the full gravity of what is going on. So let's just say, for example, you have a situation where a pipe bursts in a house and the house is flooding. Even though you think that you should be springing into action, believe it or not, you could actually do more harm by springing into action in the wrong direction. When I say sit back, it could be a couple of seconds, but just ascertain everything that's going on and make sure that you understand what is actually happening. So, next thing you have to do is you actually have to identify what the problem is. What is the source of the problem? Now, in the flight deck, when we have an engine catch on fire, there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of bells and whistles and emergencies going on in the flight deck, and there's a lot of things shutting down, and there's a lot of indications of that. So for example, we may get low oil pressure, we may get low hydraulic pressure, we may get the engine fire bell going off. A lot of things going on. If we were to focus on the low hydraulic pressure, for example, that's not actually the problem. And if we started running the checklist on the low hydraulic system, that's not the problem. That's not gonna fix the fact that we have an engine in flames out on the wing. Same thing in your rental property. If you have a flooded pipe and you're trying to fix the pipe, that may not be the problem. There may be a bigger problem that you don't realize. So identifying the problem is very, very important. It's the first step that many people miss. The next step in identifying, after you have identified the problem, is making sure that everyone agrees that that's the problem. So in the flight deck, when we say, okay, I see a left engine on fire, does everyone agree that we've got a left engine on fire? Not the right engine, but the left engine. Yep, I agree that that's the left engine. Now, same thing in real estate. It sounds so inconsequential, but to make sure, do we all agree, yes, we know the house is flooding, but the pipe is burst here. We know that that's the problem, right? Or the roof has collapsed. Make sure everyone is in agreement. Now, the next thing you have to do is you have to start delegating. Somebody has to be in charge. There has to be a leader. In any kind of emergency, you have to take control. Just because you're the owner of the business or you're the captain of the flight deck doesn't mean that you have to be the one that does it, but somebody has to be the one in control. Now, the way that you're in control is you start delegating who is doing what. So again, on the flight deck, the first thing we do is say, I'm flying the airplane, you're working the checklist, you're talking to air traffic control, you're talking to the flight attendants in the back, everyone do your job and let's come back. Everyone starts doing their job, right? So same thing here. You may say, okay, the roof is caved in, you call the roofer, I'm gonna call the insurance company, you talk to the tenant, make sure everyone is incongruent and you're not all doing the same job. Because many times you may all be calling the roofer. Just like on the airplane. There may be everybody trying to work the checklist and nobody is actually flying the plane. And there have actually been accidents when there was a light bulb that went out, a 2-cent light bulb went out because the landing gear was not showing down and locked, and everybody was so focused in the flight deck of that 2-cent light bulb that nobody flew the plane, and it slowly descended and it actually crashed and killed everyone because nobody actually said who's flying the airplane. So it seems so obvious, but believe it or not, you get very tunnel vision in an emergency because it's not something that you're normally doing. It's not something that happens to you every day. Next thing you have to do is once you identify who's doing what, you have to work towards the solution. Many, many times people dwell on the problem. Yes, I know that the roof collapsed. There's nothing you could do about that. We know we have an engine on fire. There's nothing we can do about that. What we now have to do is start working towards a solution, right? There's times to second guess, why did the roof collapse? Why did our engine catch on fire? Why did the pipe burst? But right now is not the time to do that. Right now is the time to say, okay, we know what we have. We all agree that's what it is. We're all doing our jobs. Now let's come up with a solution. Let's fix the problem, right? Once you fix the problem, the key here is everybody coming back and everybody actually communicating with each other what was done. And that's what a lot of people miss. You didn't know that, oh, the roofer's on his way out, he'll be there in 30 minutes, right? You didn't know the insurance company's on their way. You didn't know that you've already talked to air traffic control and you got cleared to land in Denver and you're heading to Colorado Springs. So you've got to make sure that everyone is on the same page, because this is when, in the heat of battle, we sometimes forget, we get into this tunnel mode that we want to just fix everything ourselves. And in a business situation, in a flight deck situation, in any kind of situation, that is actually some of the worst things you can do. In flying, they say it'll take you to the crash site quicker. In real estate, very similar to that. So always make sure that you are constantly communicating with everyone so that everyone knows what's going on and everyone is in agreement. Because one person may see something that someone else doesn't, and if you don't ask for their participation, they may say, I'm not gonna say anything because I don't know that this is right. But that may actually be the only right person because they're removed from it and they're looking at it from a different angle. So again, always remember, sit back, take a breath, assess the situation. Then next thing you gotta do is you have to make sure that you ascertain what is actually the problem, the root problem. Then you delegate tasks of who's doing what. Someone has to be the leader. Then focus on the solutions. And last, you got to communicate with everyone. If you do those things in any kind of emergency, I would suggest you start creating a standard operating procedure. So you need to have some sort of manual, right? What do I do when a roof collapses? Well, we do this, 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 and this. Very simple, right? You can use those 4 things that I just talked about, and you can use that as the example of creating your manual. Same thing with a pipe busting. Same thing when a tenant skips out. Same thing when a contractor doesn't do their job, right? That's how we have checklists in the flight deck. There's thousands of pilots. We can all fly with each other because we know exactly what we're doing per our standard operating procedure. If you don't have a standard operating procedure in your real estate business, even if you have one rental, you should get one. If you don't have one, you should create one or you should buy one. But make sure that you're operating standard, because you want to make sure that if you're not there and a roof collapses because you're on vacation, they're not calling you saying, what do I do? There should be a standard operating procedure with how you operate every single time for every kind of scenario. And as you go through scenarios, you'll keep building on the manual. So this is Steve Rozenberg. I hope this helps. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.